McIntyre.
McIntyre.
Who is this? It reminds me of the fact that very often I get telephone calls, and I'm sure that you're bombarded by telephone calls that say, hello, could I please speak to a Mr. McIntyre? No, there's nobody of that name in this address. Or variations. I won't go. I mean, on one occasion I got somebody who said, could you, they wanted to talk to me about, would I complete a survey? And it's always, how are you? Yeah. Are you feeling very well? And on one occasion the devil inside me said, no, I'm not. I died 3 days ago. And I was resurrected yesterday. And oh, does my back ache? It's the most appalling thing to be resurrected, something I can't, I wouldn't recommend to anybody be on the bomb.
Oh, well, that's the best.
Best way. Thank you very much for taking the trouble to join us today. And I hope you can all hear me without the aid of the microphone. Name is Tony McIntyre. Can I just ask you, please, how many people here are non-members? Thank you. Thank you. Don't leave, and I hope I won't chase you away by what I'm going to say. What I want to talk to you about today is, we very often hear that UKIP is a one-trick pony, and that is it just has a policy about the EU. Well, we just released a manifesto a couple of days ago, which covers a whole host of subjects. And what I want to talk to you today about is the education policy. Why have I chosen the education policy? Well, I have a vested interest. I spent 30 years in the classroom doing my best to teach English to a range of students, starting from the age of 8 right the way up to the age of 18. The 8-year-olds, they're great because they look up at me and say, not tackling him. By 11, they're saying, we're quite interested. By 15, they're saying things a lot ruder. And then by 16, they've actually made the choice to go for the subject that they want to, and they're expecting the person in front of them to be knowledgeable on that subject. But just looking back over education over the past 25 years, in 1991 we saw the introduction of the key stage tests. In 1997, Tony Blair stood on a platform and came out with his very famous comment, education, education, education. How important is it? I feel it is incredibly important. It is essential that we properly educate the youth of today so that they can be creative in the economic environment in the future. We're looking at the future development of the country. And looking around here, we've got 2 excellent grammar schools, Torquay Grammar School for boys, Torquay Grammar School for girls. We've also got Charleston Grammar School, and we've also got academies, which used to be, we've also got an academy, which used to be a comprehensive, which is looking after those who don't get into the grammar schools. My concern on that is that it's all very well, and UKIP strongly supports the grammar school system, but it is absolutely essential that for those of you who are old enough who might remember the secondary modern system, we don't go back into that dire situation where they were sink schools. We've got to be looking after everybody as we educate them. Might interest you that from 1997 there was a revolution in schools. Teaching assistants and all the added bits and pieces that came through 10 years of Labour government. We have had it that I think it's 170,000 extra people were pulled into the education system, to work in the education system. Secondary schools dropped their pupil to teacher or pupil to adult ratio to 1 to 11. A huge investment. The workforce increase during that period of 10 years was actually more than the armed forces, the combined Army, Navy and Air Force together. That was the increase. A huge investment. Was it an improvement? Did we see anything come out of it of benefit? Well, we saw a greater emphasis on education, but we also saw a dumbing down of an education, of an examination system. I think it's widely agreed. I mean, from a teacher's perspective, the exams got easier. Why did they get easier? Because there was an introduction of 4 boards to actually process the exams. There was the Oxford and Cambridge board, which was the most difficult. Then there was the Welsh board, which was the easiest, or the easiest in some subjects. Thank you. And what that meant was that teachers who were being asked to be competitive because they were being tested, and tests were coming in at Key Stage 1, which UKIP disagrees with or is against and wants to see abolished now, at the age of 7, pressure being put on young children. Then at Key Stage 2, which was at the age of 11, which UKIP is supporting now, because it means that we can have a selective form of education for those areas which want it. And then a Key Stage 3, which was an utterly ludicrous testing system at 14, because it meant that you made the transfer to a secondary school, and then you virtually got tested within 2 years, and it was felt that this was impacting on the education system and on teachers who were teaching purely and simply for a test. And then you had the GCSEs, which were part of the entire system and were the form of qualification which took you from school into the workplace. The problem with it was if you had a wide variety of standards in this education system, the boards, you could therefore, how are you going to actually sort out where the levels were? Was a grade C from the Welsh board the same value as a grade C in the Oxford and Cambridge board? And how are employers supposed to know? And how are they to be judged? And you also had coming into the system a feeling that, well, nobody should fail. And if you have that, then you say to yourself, well, if everybody's going to be a winner, then how do you actually make a choice? How do you actually work out who's going to be worth the interview and who isn't, if you have 200 people applying for the job? So, it's making the selective part of it very much more difficult. Where does UKIP stand on? I've got here the briefing document for UKIP and this document was the basis for the work on the manifesto, or what is said in the manifesto. Its introduction, I'd like to read it to you. Our vision is to make our British education system the envy of the world, a system designed to allow all youngsters to perform to the best of their abilities, regardless of background, race, wealth, or class. And that, I think, is something that we can all appreciate, we can all agree with, as the core where we start from. And that's important. To actually say, well, once you've accepted that, then we set about how do we achieve it. It's all very well to have a noble aim, but if you can't achieve it, then it's pointless actually having it. What you've got to be able to do is to set out a series of pledges, if you like, as to how you're going to do it. From birth. Now, education. Education for me doesn't stop the age of 18 or after a degree at the age of 21. We should all be learning throughout our entire lives. Particularly those who are in retirement should be saying to themselves, well, what about taking advantage of our excellent education system and keeping the mind ticking over and keeping the interest going? You know, give yourself a purpose to live. But let us concentrate now on this, what we might call from birth up to the age of 18. Primary education. Primary education has been dogged over the past 15 years with an increase in the amount of paperwork. The tests that I've mentioned earlier, the increased levels of box ticking that has to go through for all students, the increased number of teaching assistants. And teaching assistants drove me nuts. They did an excellent job, and they were very, very good value there. Why on earth did they drive me nuts? Because every one of them required a lesson plan. And it meant that I had to sit down and I had to write all my lesson plans. And if I'm teaching 35 lessons a week, a lesson plan for each of those, the amount of paperwork, by the time we got to after lunch, invariably I had lots of blasted things. I'd written them up, and then some charming lady or gentleman came up to me and said, have you got the lesson plan? Where is it? I've got it around here somewhere. And it didn't allow you to diverge. It didn't allow you to say, well, look, we've done everything. I've got a bright group here. So what about the national curriculum? I've done that. I've done that for this month. I'm halfway through the month. What about doing something exciting? What about doing something different? What about doing something about debating? No, because I've got these classroom assistants who expect to have the lesson plan sorted out and expect me to stick to it. So it hampered my creativity unless I got on the right side of them and said, don't worry, I'll give it to you afterwards when I've written it. Some would be happily play along, others would get rather stroppy. But the whole point of this was that we stuck with it, we got through, and the classroom assistant helped the weaker ones. Interesting, it was always help the weaker ones. Look at what the Liberal Democrats have pushed through the government over the past 5 years. Full pupil premium, £1,300 available to each pupil who is struggling. My question is, where is the emphasis on our bright children? The ones who are going to actually be the leaders of the future. We're saying, well, of course, they can do it themselves. No, they need stimulating. They need to be pushed. And invariably, in a lot of situations, you say, well, they're being held back. They're being pulled back to the average. And I disagree with that. I think that those bright children should be allowed to bloom, to flourish, to become academics of the future. And then you've got the other impact which has come in over the past 10 or 15 years, and that is the different languages that the children speak, that their parents speak. There are a whole variety. Some head teachers you will hear turn around and say, oh, this is brilliant. This is multiculturalism at its best. Yeah, that's a wonderful sentiment, but you've got 30 children in front of you. 2 of them national language is Spanish. 2 of them national language is French. 4 of them have a Polish as their national language. A couple of the Lithuanians and the rest are English. So I breeze in and I think, great, what can I do this time? So I decide to do Lewis Carroll's The Jabberwocky, which was brilliant. And the sliding terms, the car and gimbal in the world. In the way. We get to the end of the first line. I've got a group who I say, well, what about the imagery in this? child at the back, Lisa, what does brilliant mean? Well, that's the whole point. I'm trying to get you to imagine what brilliant means. And it goes completely over the head. And then you've got somebody else who's interpreting it to try and make it make sense. And invariably they're failing somewhat. And you can't actually move forward with a small, you can split it up into small groups. And then you end up teaching 4 or 5 different lessons at the same time. And you can't give them the amount of attention. Now, it's difficult. But what I'm trying to say is I respect anybody who is a teacher at the moment, incredible respect. I started in 1974, and it has been a lot more difficult. And I think that teachers, 99% of them are doing an absolutely fantastic job. And they need our support. And at the moment, I get a bit fed up with teacher bashing. Because if we can give them the support, if we can reduce the paperwork, we can reduce the tick boxing, we can reduce the preparation for exams, keep the 11 plus, as I say, keep the key stage 2, however you wish to phrase it, keep the moderators in place, because this was another boom. I don't know whether anybody ever saw anybody here has ever seen the key stage 2 and key stage, well, what used to be the key stage 3 exam papers. I'll never forget them being delivered to my classroom, key stage 2, to get them going. Boxes of them. And you pull them out, and there was a leaflet box, there was a 10-page booklet that they had to read, then the answer sheets, and all this was just for English. And it went on, you had the same for maths and the same for science. Huge amounts of paper which had to be sent in various directions around the country. And you began to wonder, this is a paper chase. And then, of course, the moderators, and it was almost an industry in itself. Moving on, UKIP will scrap life skills and sex and relationship education for children under the age of 11. We've seen the latest idea that children should have sex education at the age of 6. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Destroying
We're
childhood.
taking away from children their childhood. What about parental responsibilities? We seem to be taking away from parents' responsibility of bringing their own children up. What we would like to see, what UKIP wants, is to be able to say, we want to actually educate and not try and influence children as young as that into thinking about the way in which society is going.
There's that sophistication.
Moving on to secondary education. Moving on to the 16 plus. This would have some establishments should convert to vocational schools, colleges, developing practical skills based upon the highly successful German model. Vocational education will never be seen as a second-class option under a UKIP government. This would have a strong industry link, and we would introduce an option for students to take an apprenticeship qualification instead of 4 non-core GCSEs, which can be continued in post-16 education. I was reading a fascinating article about professions, careers. Careers should be taught in the secondary school, and should in particular be taught to the 15, 16. They did a survey. Hairdressers, well, everybody knew what a hairdresser was. A builder. Not many of the students knew what a welder was. Didn't have a clue. A Thatcher. Question, is that somebody who drinks Thatcher's? And there are many, many other professions, and the breadth of the professions should actually be taken into consideration. Give a full option. Finally, what about funding for, basically for 4 or 5 to 16 has worked out fairly well, and it's been well funded over the past 5 years. We want to see more money put into 16 to 18 colleges and A-level students. There has to be an increase in funding there. What about higher education, university education? We would like to see an emphasis put on courses which are going to be beneficial to the economy of this country. And we should be looking at reducing the fee level for anybody who wants to do maths, pure maths, applied maths, to do engineering, and to do courses of that nature, that ilk, and to actually look to support them through grants. I've overstepped my time, as I've been warned. Thank you very much for listening. And do I have time for any questions? And I will be answering any questions that you might have after lunch. Thank you.